It's time for Commonwealth Common Sense with Susan Stimpson and Kevin Scholla.
Hello, Susan. Welcome back.
Hi, Kevin. My pleasure to be here.
So what's going on?
Well, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what we've been discussing about the move that American Crossroads and the U.S. Chamber is making, the loud noises in the newspapers and in the online debate about how they are going to weigh in with $50 million to ensure that there are no quote-unquote loser candidates. I think if you dig a little deeper into this issue, that there are other issues that really are important to these groups. Part of it, I think, is the illegal immigration issue. I think there's a move by big business that they would like to just see blanket amnesty, because at the end of the day, for the big corporations, that means a lower cost to them for the workforce. And I do agree that there are genuine reforms that I think that we can do regarding the immigration issue. But if you watch what happens in these election cycles and what seems to happen to many people who get elected into office, especially in this D.C. climate, money controls much of it. And if you do not play by their rules, then you get cut off. But if you do play by the rules, then your campaign donations continue to flow, and you end up making decisions that, at the end of the day, seem to benefit big business over the average American.
Right, and then everything just goes around and around in a circle again. The whole, going along to get along deal that Palin always speaks out against. That's what you get here, because they play by our rules and we'll take care of you kind of thing, instead of the service that you're supposed to be offering.
The interesting thing that is happening with this debate, though, is that the average person who isn't necessarily a political hack seems to be getting it. I was out to dinner with friends last week, and one of the people said, I would rather the 25 people that work in this restaurant be the ones who are making the decisions for us in Congress in Washington, D.C., because I would trust them more than I do the people who are there. And I think that is what the Founding Fathers did intend. They intended for people to move through the system and to not stay entrenched in office for decades. And they did have certain checks and balances in place, the Senate functioning differently than Congress functions. But there is a missing part of what's happening in D.C., but you're seeing it grow and influence. The average person coming in to Washington, D.C. Is now, I think you're seeing in some of these candidates, they're a little more in tune with what's happening with the average American, and they're bucking the system, and big business doesn't like that.
Well, you're right, and the founders wanted people to come from all walks of life and also to go serve and then go back to their old job instead of, rotting and being part of Washington for decades upon decades. I think we saw that the last time around. A lot of the folks that Governor Palin endorsed, Deb Fisher, a rancher, Paul Gosar, a dentist, Ted Yoho, a veterinarian, different types of people with different takes on things and, offering what they can offer and then getting out of there. So what do we look for here? Is term limits a solution?
I do think that term limits is one way to move toward just ensuring that there's a better flow of people coming in and out of political office. It was never meant or intended by the Founding Fathers to be a career, but we certainly are seeing very many of them stay in there for quite a long time and making a career of it. And I do think that term limits is one way that we could address this issue. I also think, especially here in Virginia, that should be wrapped in ethics reform. And unfortunately, the number of bills that I've looked at that have been submitted by legislators for potential discussion this session, very, very few of them deal with ethics reform, and there is a need to address the very lax reform ideas that just don't exist right now.
I tend to agree with you. Just to play devil's advocate, though, I've heard people say, and these have been conservatives, some conservatives I've heard say this as far as term limits, that, well, they're not really for them because if you're in a liberal district or a conservative district, you're just going to get the same type of policies anyway, even though the person may be different. But I think that perhaps the next person may learn from what the other person did or didn't do. What do you think?
I think part of what happens is that you can become desensitized, and if you stay in the office for too long, you just become desensitized to issues that you did understand before you were a legislator. And I used to not be a fan of term limits, but seeing the influence that business does have and that lobbyists do have, and really just a circular function of lobbyists lobbying, elected officials, and then the campaign accounts grow and decisions are made based on what those lobbyists want versus what's best for the people, just because they're trying to win the next election. I think if there's a freedom for people who are in this office not having to worry about the next election, I think you would see a different decision-making process and a different result.
All right, Susan, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.